I tell you what, I don't often get to meet my heroes, and I met one of them yesterday. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, born in Somalia, raised in a devout Muslim household, fled her old life to avoid a forced marriage. She ended up a refugee, as many know, in the Netherlands, ultimately elected to Parliament. And that's where she became an outspoken critic of radical Islam. Now, for the past couple of decades, she has been warning us in the West about the threat of unchecked Muslim migration and the end game of radical Islam. By speaking out, she's become a target herself for violent extremists. She lives in fear of her life, but that's never deterred her. It was my absolute pleasure to be able to sit down with her and speak with the very brave Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I am thrilled to have you on the program. I've been a huge fan for such a long time. How does a liberal society deal with people in our country who literally believe in death to the infidel?
Peter, it's wonderful to be with you. That's a very, very big question. I would start by defining what liberal society is. So in this case, we're talking about Australia, and see Australia as a nation state with roots in Christianity and Christian morality, and with a constitution, with customs, with rituals, with norms, and that's what you emphasize. If you want to invite people in from outside of Australia to settle and live in Australia and to belong, I think it's very important to have the conversation with them that this is the place you're coming. Here's what Australia is all about. And in order to belong, you are going to adhere to our norms, and we'll tell you why. But if you don't want to adhere to our norms, it's fine. We believe in freedom, but you don't get to live here.
What about the term multiculturalism? Because it's almost celebrated, particularly in places like Australia, and it's almost an embarrassment that our own old culture, in our case predominantly an Anglo culture with Indigenous underpinnings, but our own culture isn't good enough on its own, that bringing in all of these people have made us richer and better, but in some instances it's come at a cost.
I think the mistake that was made years ago was to apply that philosophy to immigrants. And immigrants who were settled in Australia and given citizenship were also told that they could assimilate or integrate on their own terms, hold on to their own identity. And unfortunately, the result of that for some of these immigrants, not all of them, but for some of these immigrants, was to form their own ghettos. Enter radical Islam, which is an international ideology that seeks to transform everywhere it goes and tries to take over control and power. And the philosophy of multiculturalism empowered the Islamists into isolating Muslim individuals, convincing them that the Islamist worldview is their worldview and that is what it is to be a Muslim, and turning them against the local populations. The problem you're seeing in Australia is exactly the same problem they have in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in other parts of Europe, but we also have it in the United States. And so now I think is the time to say multiculturalism as a philosophy has failed. If you want to bring about social cohesion in a nation state, you emphasize what unites us. You don't emphasize what divides us. And multiculturalism is about emphasizing what divides us. And the way multiculturalism works is some of these communities, minorities, as they say, are to be afforded exemptions from the laws that majorities have to uphold.
Yes, and we see that in the United Kingdom too, don't we, with the debate about Sharia law, the debate about marriage to first cousins. That's been a feature of quite a lot of contention in the British Parliament recently. You mentioned the move by radical Islam across the West. What's their end game?
Of radical Islam. The radical Islamists, they want to bring about Sharia. Their end game is they've got this thing called the Caliphate, the Islamic State. That's their utopian dream. That's what they want to achieve. And they don't just want to achieve it for themselves in their own societies. They want to impose it on the whole world. In fact, after the Arab Spring, one of the new developments is the original countries of Islam, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Egypt, have banned, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood, and have banned other Islamists from preaching or having to do anything with politics. And so you see in the source countries, in the original countries of Islam, Islamism is out. They've then migrated and they've come to Western societies that pride themselves on freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and so on. And so they've set up shop here. And they have decided they're going to start the Islamization process, or they're going to headquarter the Islamist project from the UK and from France and from Germany, and in this case from Australia, which is just strange.
Are you surprised at how quickly some of our societies have become radicalised and Islamified?
I'm not surprised, because for the last 25 years I've been banging on about exactly what you're talking about. So I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed that people like me were ignored, not listened to. So I think what we have to do is go back to emphasizing the nation state and what unites us, to identify the problem with the Islamists. It is this infrastructure that they have established that they use to Islamize the mosques, the schools, the Islamic centers. Break those up. And I think it is time to deport the radical imams, and it's time to give the citizens who are Muslim, who live in Australia, the options. Do you want to be Australian? Then you're welcome and you stay, and this is who we are. And if you don't want to be an Australian citizen, as in an allegiance to the Australian Constitution and flag and norms and customs, then we are happy to let you go back to where you want to go back, the country of origin.
At home there's a lot of radical Muslim mosques and preachers, and we are really, really reluctant at official level to stamp this out. We tend to tiptoe around the issue. Some of these preachers are on foreign visas. They could be deported, but they are not. And I look to the example of the United States, the United Kingdom, and people raise this with me every time I come to Britain. They say, learn from our example, Australia. Do not end up like we are. I feel we've still got a chance to avert course. Do you think Britain has a chance and Europe has a chance, Ayaan, to avert course?
The options get harder and harder. I think that Britain still has a chance, because the numbers, even though they're a lot higher than 20 years ago, they're still relatively small, that you have to choose the lesser of two evils. What I worry about for Britain and for the rest of Europe is an actual civil war. And we're not at that stage yet. And in Australia, there are things you can do now that are relatively easy. And every Briton who tells you, learn from us, please learn from them. The situation is becoming ever more urgent. We are liberal societies. So yes, listen to the British people who are warning you now.
As I mentioned at the start of our chat, I've been a huge fan of you for most of my adult life. I've read all of your books. I've followed your extraordinary personal story. I think you are incredibly brave, and I think you are prescient in the sense that you warned the West about these issues 2 decades ago, and here we are. One of the things I've noticed in recent years has been you've had a huge personal journey in terms of faith. Tell us a little bit about that journey from being a Muslim, Islam, through now to Christianity.
Well, that's been a long journey. So I think maybe some of my Australian audiences know about Infidel, where I told my whole story. I was born in Somalia. I grew up in Somalia and in Saudi Arabia, in Ethiopia and in Kenya. And then I was 22 years old when I came to Holland. My father had arranged someone for me to marry, and I didn't want to marry him. I didn't want to live with him. And so when I was in Germany on my way to Holland, on my way to Canada, instead I went to Holland and I asked for asylum. And I lived in Holland. I had a very good, happy life until 9/11, and that's when I really actively joined politics. And a year after that, I said I'm not a Muslim anymore. That put me in a lot of trouble. I campaigned for Muslim women who were subjected to what's called honor violence. Yeah, and you've heard of female genital mutilation, honor killings. These girls are pulled out of school. They're forced into marriages they don't want. They're constantly beaten and punished. And I did, for a while, I campaigned to bring about awareness to their plight.
Well, I've watched you move around the room and at this conference, and I think there's a lot of people that have the same feeling as I do. You're a rock star here, Ayaan, and I am so delighted to have had you on the program.
Peter, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very, very much for having me, and to be continued.
To be continued.
Yes.